Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by John Eastman. He's with the Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence. John, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Chris.
I knew it was going to blow. That just too many words.
I told you to say the legal arm of the Claremont Institute, and you wouldn't do it.
So tell us, how did you get into law and conservatism? Do you have a death wish or something?
No, it's I grew up studying the American founding like we used to teach to our kids, and I realized that we had gotten off track, and I wanted a career to help get us back on track. And I quickly learned that having a law degree, given that so many of the fights were in the courts, was the way to go.
So how's that working for you?
Well, it was doing pretty good until we lost Justice Scalia in February, and now it's up for grabs. So I hope people will keep that in mind when they vote in November.
Yeah, there are all sorts of things that you're known for. And one of the things that you'll be speaking about, for example, this evening at the Conservative Forum is immigration. Talk to us a little bit about how that became an interest for you and what's the lay of the land for immigration.
Sure.
Right now?
Well, 15 years ago, we captured a guy in Afghanistan who had been born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and as soon as they figured that out, they started treating him as a citizen, even though his dad was here. He's a Saudi, been here on a short-term work visa. And I started looking at the 14th Amendment that says all persons born here and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States are automatic citizens, and we've kind of written that second clause out of it. And so I started looking at that, and then of course this presidential campaign kind of brought that issue to the forefront, and my work was being quoted all over the place. So it kind of put me in the middle of a hurricane, if you will.
Right. And so the immigration debate has not slowed down. I mean, you've got things such as border security that are brought into the discussion. People automatically associate the word immigration with racism, not with security, as an example. Just today I saw a news piece about ISIS training centers being confirmed on the border of Mexico and the United States, working with the cartels. Imagine that.
Right.
And then we get into discussions, for example, of this former presidential candidate, Ted Cruz. Is he naturally born, or is he illegal, or what's his problem as well?
So yeah, I'll start with that one because that's most fun. So any parent out there, if you've got kids and they're a natural athlete, you say they're natural born athlete, right? They didn't kind of learn it around later in life. They were an athlete from birth, or a natural musician, natural born musician. We'll often use that phrase. Well, that's all the natural born citizenship clause of the Constitution is. Were you a citizen from birth, or did you subsequently become a citizen by a naturalization process? And under that definition, Ted was a citizen from birth. His mother was a citizen. She had not revoked her U.S. citizenship, and so he was a citizen as well.
Okay.
So that was easy.
And it would have mattered if he would have stayed in, but a lot of people said he wasn't even eligible to run for president.
I will say I'm a Ted Cruz delegate, so I'm hoping people in my congressional district here in California vote for him so I can still go to the convention and help bring some sanity to the process.
You just admitted that you're in California and you're a delegate for Cruz. Wow. The hate mail.
Yeah. Well, I'm a conservative law professor, so I'm used to it. No, but the other issue that I'm going to be talking about tonight is the president's unbelievable lawlessness on refusing to enforce executive immigration law, and not just using prosecutorial discretion to refuse to deport people that the law requires him to deport, but giving out benefits, work authorizations, Social Security status, earned income tax credits back retroactive 3 years, spending tens of millions of dollars without any authority. And that's a basic separation of powers question. What does our Constitution say about who makes the law versus who enforces or executes the law? And he's just ignoring those basic structural limitations on the executive branch.
Right. And so a whole nother question, though, comes up from that. In the past, when they were teaching these things about checks and balances, and we had the executive branch and the judicial branch, right? And then we've got the Congress. People are not clear that they were supposed to actually keep each other in check versus figure out ways to authorize every executive order that comes across from the president.
Well, the founders, I truly believe that there was a kind of a divine intervention, a lining of the stars or the planets, if you will, back in the 1770s and 1780s when our founders here, they were well studied in political theory. They'd read all the Greeks and the Romans and the English. They had studied this stuff. They also had a lot of practical experience, having effectively run their own countries in their states because of hands-off approach from Great Britain until the 1760s. And it was a unique combination of expertise and thoughtfulness that gave us the greatest constitution the world has ever seen. But it was designed out of recognition that men are not angels, and that if you give them power, they're going to try and abuse it. And so they set the system up so that power was there to check power. Right. And the lawmaking power is given to Congress, but they can't do anything to enforce it. And you have an executive that has a great deal of power, but if he oversteps his bounds, you have an independent judiciary. And when the federal government itself oversteps its bounds, you had the states kind of serving as a counterbalance to make sure that they didn't get intrusive or abusive. And we've thrown all of that carefully wrought system out in recent years.
Well, and it gets into an interesting thing, because you talk about the states being the fourth check and balance when jurisdictional power is overstepped, and then this week we have North Carolina that is being sued by the federal government, and then now they're retaliating. Give us a little bit of your perspective on that story.
Well, the story is just it's another aspect of this president's claim that he can do whatever he wants with a pen. And so his Office of Civil Rights, the Civil Rights Division over at the Department of Justice, has completely redefined our civil rights laws so that prohibition on sex and specific protection for same-sex bathrooms and showers, the kind of things where you expect privacy, that doesn't violate the civil rights laws. And his Civil Rights Division has manipulated the language to say that those words include gender identity, and therefore if you don't treat a man who thinks he's a woman or claims to be a woman and allow him naked into the showers with your 12-year-old daughter, you're violating the Civil Rights Act. It's insane. And there's no law that does that. This was all done through manipulation of language at the Department of Justice under the Obama administration. And so North Carolina is absolutely right to be fighting back, because not only is this an overreach by the federal government, it's an unbelievable overreach by the executive beyond what the executive power had at all.
Right. And then there are times when, as you said earlier, the federal government decides they don't want to enforce the law. So the border states, as an example, like Texas, like New Mexico, like Arizona, or California, that end up having to deal with an immigration issue. Right. Can't get the federal support and are indeed told this is a catch and release program.
Right.
So
they claim it's all within the executive's prosecutorial discretion, and that's something that we all recognize. I suspect many in your audience have occasionally driven more than the speed limit out on the interstate.
Not me, but I've heard other people do it. Yeah.
And if you pass a highway patrol officer and you're only going a couple of miles over the speed limit, you don't even get the heart palpitation that you might otherwise get. That's an exercise of prosecutorial discretion, but he doesn't give you a certificate that allows you to continue to speed for the rest of your life, right? The next police officer, if you're speeding, can stop you. So this president is effectively given out a certificate to allow you to continue violating or breaking the law. And he's only doing it by people that are enforcing the immigration laws. Cities like San Francisco, just up the way a little bit here, that refuse to enforce the law the other direction, he gives a pass to. And so, the whole sanctuary city movement and all of that, complete derogation of their responsibilities under various federal statutes, and he doesn't do anything about that. So this is agenda-driven, not law-driven, and it's gotten to the point where it's just utterly lawless.
And so, what's the solution? Where are the checks? Where are the balances? Yeah. What happens?
Well, and, I think one of the reasons you've seen this be the year of the outsider. I mean, think about all of the leading candidates for the Republican presidential nomination. The one who now is the presumptive nominee, Donald Trump, has been raising these issues. But all of the other people that at one point or another were leading contenders, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, Marco Rubio even, who ended up in the so-called establishment lane, built his career in his initial election, challenging the establishment. The people in Washington who promised to do something about this and then signed off on the president's lawlessness. Right. And that's what the electorate anger that you're seeing erupting is.
Right. And so then what happens is we think, we talked about the check and balance in the judiciary specifically. Right now, we do have an opening at the Supreme Court level. Talk to me about what it means to leave that opening in flux.
Yeah, well, there have been whole points in our history where we didn't have 9 justices on the Supreme Court. There were 8 or there were 7. There were originally 6. So having 9 is no magic number. The court can continue to do its business. On the rare occasion where they split 4-4, all that means is the lower court decision ends up being affirmed, and in that case is decided. And if it's a big enough issue, it'll come back around once there's 9 justices back on the court. So him not being there is not the kind of catastrophic thing for those terms. It is catastrophic given the balance on the court on what we think the proper role of the judiciary is. And there are now 2 very distinct schools of thought. One is that the judiciary is there to faithfully interpret and apply and enforce the Constitution. And there's another school of thought that the Constitution is living and ever evolving, and it's the judge's job to figure out what it's evolved to at this particular moment and impose their will or their view of what it ought to be on the rest of the country. And quite frankly, I think that's an entirely illegitimate role for the court. We would never have ratified a Constitution that said, let's take 9 people, lawyers, most of them from Harvard and Yale, and give them unfettered power to do whatever they want without ever having to face an election. Nobody would have supported yet, and this is what the living Constitution view of the court has become.
Right. And this is one of the reasons why there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle saying that they don't want to vote for the candidate that seems to be their presumptive choice in the election. So what does that mean if people decide to sit it out as far as making sure that these new openings, because there will be other openings.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
Judges are reaching a seasoned stature in life.
I'm reminded of an old party that Benjamin Franklin threw at his birthday in Paris, and he announced that he was 67. And one of the ladies there who knew better said, "Why, Dr. Franklin, you're 73." And he said, "When you hit 70, you can decide to keep counting up or start counting back." Well, several of them are well above 70. Yeah. Justice Ginsburg, Justice Kennedy, Justice Breyer, all in their late 70s or early 80s. Justice Thomas in his late 60s. There are going to be probably 3 more vacancies on the court, plus the one that's currently there, for the next president to pick. Certainly at the end of 8 years, but most probably at the end of 4 years.
Right. So what that means is that even though people might be disheartened with their choices really will have ramifications for the direction of the country as a whole, for the direction of the courts, for whether or not they want to see the Constitution upheld or dismantled.
Well, that's right. And by the way, it ought not to be that way. It ought not to matter who is picking judges if the judges are doing the job the Constitution envisions for them,
right.
Faithfully interpreting the Constitution. There will be some legitimate areas of disagreement that could push it one way or the other. Right. That's politics. But we now have a situation where one party thinks that judges ought to be making law and rewriting the Constitution to achieve their agendas rather than faithfully applying it. And that means the political stakes of who those appointees are to the court are extraordinary.
But it also nullifies any power that Congress has in the first place. So why does it matter who's over there if the laws are going to be written in the judicial?
See, I don't think it matters. And I think part of the movement we saw starting back in 2010, which got its genesis in opposition to Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, part of that movement is constitutional in nature. That it's the people uprising and saying we've tolerated these abuses from Washington and the failure to comply with the limits on your power according to the Constitution for too long. And just like the Declaration of Independence says, well, we'll suffer abuses while they remain sufferable because we got other better things to do. We got soccer games to go to and getting the kids to school and music lessons and all those things. But at the point of time when the abuses become insufferable and intolerable, that the people are rising up. And I think we're in the middle of that. It's not come to a conclusion yet. But Congress needs to be fighting back against courts that say things like the court last week did in Virginia, that that the law requires you to let men into your girls' bathrooms. I mean, this is crazy. And I think what people are looking for is some backbone in Congress to start exercising the powers the Constitution does give them to serve as a check on the judiciary or on the executive.
And so of the three main candidates that remain standing, of course, there are hundreds that just want their name on the ballot across the country, what have you. Do you have any insight into where each of them stand as far as enforcement of the Constitution first?
Well, we know for a fact Hillary Clinton supports the leftist agenda, which is a constitution that doesn't mean what it says.
Right.
It means whatever their favorite judges can import into it. Bernie Sanders hasn't given us any indication one way or another, but one can't imagine he supports the view that the Constitution controls when he doesn't think any protection for property ought to be extant. And with Republican nominee Trump, presumptive nominee Donald Trump, he's claimed his sister, who's fairly left-wing, would make a great Supreme Court pick. And then, in the primaries, he said two great judges and good friends of mine, Dianne Sykes and Bill Pryor, would make great Supreme Court judges, as they would. So if he sticks with that promise, then we'll get constitutionalists back on the court.
Right.
I think a lot of the concern that people have was he just playing to the primary audience? Does he believe that? Does he even know what the stakes are? And I think that we'll have to see.
Right. There was some, I don't know if it was folklore, legend, or reality, a statement that he may have made saying that he hasn't taken the time to read the Constitution in the first place because it hasn't been worth his time.
Because it takes about 5 minutes to get through it. It's a short
and a half if you really stretch it out.
Yeah. Or at least just know the difference between Article 1 and Article 2 and Article 3. The judges don't make law. They're not supposed to.
Right.
Congress is supposed to make law.
And they have headings describing what's in there for one scan.
And Article 1, Section 1, at the very first line, once you get past the preamble, all lawmaking power herein granted is vested in a Congress of the United States. It's pretty clear.
Yeah. So from a constitutional perspective, what do you think are the top three items that people should be watching for and voting for in this election cycle? Because people are trying to figure out, what do I vote for in this?
I think, when you've had an administration like we've had for the last 8 years that completely ignores the limitations that the Constitution poses on its powers.
Right.
There are two ways you can react to that. You can react by saying, well, they've now set a precedent. We can do whatever we want.
Right.
That genie's out of the bottle, and we live lawlessly from here on. Or you can come back in and restore constitutionalism and get back to the notion that we're governed. The only authority the government has is that which comes from the people, and the only way we have given that authority is through the written document that's our Constitution. And if you don't have that, then you have a tyranny. And so the most critical important thing for people to ask is, who's going to put that genie back in the bottle and get us back on track to living according to the Constitution?
Now that you've said what people are going to ask, do you have an answer to that question?
Well, I think all of the candidates need it. We did know the reason I was backing Ted Cruz is it was very clear that he understood the stakes of such a battle, and I'm hoping that the people are gravitating toward Donald Trump. Several people that I hold in very high regard, people like Senator Jeff Sessions, for example, will impress upon him the need to articulate the role of the executive in those terms.
And so, coming from the Cruz camp, and now there's this very vocal group of Ted supporters. They go one way or the other, right? It's either, yes, we'll get in and we'll hold our nose and we'll vote, or there's the never Trump crowd.
Right.
It sounds like, even though Trump wouldn't have been your first choice, you're trying to convince people that he deserves some investigation.
The question people have to ask is, who poses the greatest long-term threat to constitutionalism? Because if we don't recover our Constitution, we don't live in a free society anymore.
Right.
And there is a credible argument to be made, and I quite frankly, I'm on the fence on this. There's a credible argument to be made that Hillary as president would do the things we expect her to do, but that the Constitutional Conservative Party will remain in opposition, where it's harder to be in opposition to the guy that's the head of your own party.
Right.
And that if we want to keep a credible constitutional opposition party alive to recover our Constitution when times are more favorable, that Hillary might be better. That's not a crazy argument.
Right.
The counter argument is that Donald Trump is surrounding himself with people that understand and have been in those fights, and maybe he didn't understand the stakes of that constitutional crisis we're in, but that people around him are letting him know that that's what's at stake and that maybe he'll rise to the occasion. So, I'm on the fence. I have not decided which side of that I come down on.
Right.
But that's the kind of question people ought to be asking, it seems to me. Because we're not talking about choosing somebody who can, do a good TV show or who has an email server. We're talking about choosing the President of the United States, the head of a third of the country's, governing power in the most powerful country in the world. The stakes are very high that we get this right, or that if we don't get it right this time, that we keep open the possibility of getting it right the next time.
And many people have speculated that Trump was in there from the beginning just to make it easier for Hillary to win. The polling is changing a little bit now. What are your thoughts? Can he win in the first place?
Well, I think people that say he can't win are the same ones that have been, thought that his campaign would have been over within a month of his announcing last summer.
Right.
They've underestimated him, but more importantly, I think they've underestimated the level of anger in the country at what's happening in Washington across the aisle. The Republicans in Congress capitulation to Obama, the Obama administration's jam down on immigration, on all things large and small, this transgendered bathroom nonsense, but even small petty things, unilaterally renaming Mount McKinley in Alaska without any legal authority to do it. I mean, people are tired of it. Or even the Supreme Court last year, wherever people came down on same-sex marriage, the notion that 9 unelected judges are going to decide that question for the country. People were angry about that. Even folks that supported same-sex marriage said the court had no business doing that. And so I think folks are reacting to this oppression from Washington. And since Trump has tapped into that, whether rightly or wrongly, whether that's really where he is or not, he's tapped into it. And I don't think any pollster in the country can give you an accurate read on how things are going to come out.
Yeah, well, anything also can happen in the next 5 or 6 months on a global scale, which tends to shift people's emotions one way or the other.
That's right. Or we could get, an indictment against Hillary Clinton out of the FBI, who seems to have a whole slew of evidence of criminal conduct. The conduct that is 10 times worse than already tied up David Petraeus and got him indicted and convicted. So there's a lot of things that yet can happen.
But they're saying at the same time they don't have quite enough yet to indict.
Well, my read on that is that they don't have quite enough poll information to know whether she loses or wins. And if it looks like she's losing, they'll indict immediately and get somebody else in there. No, I don't know. That's very cynical. I'm not quite so cynical.
So if people are looking to follow you, your thoughts, get more information on your perspectives, is there a website or someplace they can find you?
Sure. I'd be delighted. The Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence, which is a public interest law firm that I run, and we've done over 100 cases in the Supreme Court over the last decade. We're affiliated with the Claremont Institute, and so people can go to claremont.org and see our writings and our scholarship and the cases we're involved in.
And so is that Claremont?
Yes.
Versus others? Okay.
Yes.
So
Claremont, Claremont.org.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you for joining us, for sharing some of your insight. If you hold on for just a moment,
sure.
We'll be back after word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. They've been underwriting the show for this is now our 5th season, and we're greatly appreciative of the time and resources they've allocated to keeping the show on the air. But what they're best known for is their speaker series. And that's one of the reasons we were blessed to have John Eastman in the studio with us this evening. He'll be speaking at the IFES Portuguese Hall here in Mountain View at 432 Steerland Road here in Mountain View at around 7 o'clock this evening. But in June, Yaron Brook, he's the executive director at the Ayn Rand Institute, will be speaking. In July, Nick Adams, he's the founder and executive director of the Foundation for Liberty and American Greatness. And then in August, we'll be joined by Andrew McCarthy. He's a best-selling author, a senior fellow at National Review Institute, and a contributing editor. If you're looking for more information on the programs that are coming up at the forum, things like cost, time, etc., you can find that at theconservativeforum.com. But in closing this evening, John brings up a lot of interesting perspective on the Constitution and its importance and how things are run as a country on a daily basis. But we're headed into a very interesting time. Election season is coming, and the ramifications of the choices that we have for president, whether you like them or not, are important choices for us to make. Whether that be not just for your personal perspective on how well you can tolerate or not tolerate the voice of the candidate or their political perspectives, but how they can make sure that our Constitution continues to live so that our country continues to live in the state that we've become accustomed to. So learn more about what John is up to, again, by visiting his website at claremont.org, or just Google John Eastman and you'll find him out there. But we just appreciate you taking the time to learn more about John and the Right Side this evening. I've been your host, Chris Pareja. We'll look forward to seeing you again on the show or in person sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com and we'll try to get your questions answered for you. Thanks again and have a great night.